There's, Israel has has ruled over the Palestinians, 5 million Palestinians in a military occupation for more than half a century. Had many, many generations of Palestinians who've grown up without really knowing any sort of freedom. And in Gaza in particular, you have a very severe blockade that Israel has imposed that has impoverished the Gaza Strip, and most of the 2 million people who live in Gaza actually rely on international assistance for their basic needs. And so that's the context in which this is happening, as well as the sort of broader sense of despair among Palestinians that, there is no end in sight, either to Israel's occupation, which is quite violent and repressive, or to the blockade in Gaza. And so Hamas is one of the various Palestinian factions that have embraced what they call armed struggle and are determined to pursue to push back on and resist Israeli occupation through violence. Of course, the violence that they've opted for in this case is wholly unjustified in that it's directed at civilians.
Yes, and seems to be specifically directed, according to the New York Times report on hostages this morning, at women and children as well, which doesn't make any sense. I think that those of us who've read pretty in depth about this, not nearly as much as you have. You've studied Arab studies at Georgetown and Indiana University. You've taught that at Georgetown as well, and obviously you're at the Middle East Institute. But I think we understand to some extent the context of the occupation. One thing that we have trouble divining is how much support Hamas has in Gaza and from Palestinians. And I noticed in a lot of reports, for example, in the Times today, they have a ton of coverage on this conflict. They seem to conflate Palestinians and Hamas. And I wonder how fair that is. What kind of support do you think Hamas has in Gaza?
Well, you're right. It's not fair to conflate millions of Palestinians with one movement, even if that movement is governing at the moment inside the Gaza Strip. It's impossible to say exactly how much support Hamas has. I think it has support. The West Bank and Gaza are divided both politically and geographically under different kinds of Palestinian leaderships, both still under Israeli control. I would say, people in the West Bank probably are more supportive of Hamas than people in Gaza who've lived under Hamas's governing. But at the end of the day, when something like this happens, and bear in mind that Israel's now in the midst of a very severe bombing campaign inside Gaza, where, as I said, 2 million human beings live and have nowhere to go in a very narrow strip of land, and entire neighborhoods have been leveled to the ground. So I think it's impossible to overstate the ferocity of the Israeli attack. And I think we have to be mindful that, as horrific as the attacks were inside Israel, we also have to remember that there are human beings also in the Gaza Strip who are suffering and who are dying by the hundreds, and without much say in what's going on.
In fact, I read a UNICEF report this morning that estimated there are roughly 1 million children living in the Gaza Strip, meaning that almost half of the people there are, UNICEF says children are people who are under the age of 15.
Okay.
So almost half of the people there are under the age of 15, in which case, they certainly can't support Hamas. They're not capable of making that kind of decision.
So, Khaled, that kind of raises the question here. Do we have any idea, or based upon your research, do you have any idea what, other than extracting some level of retribution or revenge, what do you think Israel's strategy is in terms of its response that we expect any day now?
Tragically, I don't think they have a strategy. I mean, what they've stated is to remove Hamas or to end Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Nobody really knows what that means. I'm certain from having talked to many Israeli officials in the past that they don't know what that means. I think right now they are in a very high state of emotion and trauma. And it is primarily the response is really one of retribution, as you said, and those are actually the words that Israeli military leaders are using. That we're not after precision, we're looking to cause damage, and we're seeing that on the ground. I think there is considerable evidence that civilians are being targeted. They're bombing neighborhoods, they're bombing infrastructure, they're bombing roads, preventing ambulances from reaching, the wounded and so forth. And so it's right now emotions are running high. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be a responsible third-party actor in the international community, presumably someone like the United States that has considerable leverage, to intervene and really bring this to an end, because creating more death and destruction is not going to resolve any of the underlying issues, and in fact is just going to make things worse.